Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for everything, and I'd like to open up with a prayer, if I might, and thank you again. Thank you, gracious Father. Thank you for bringing us together one more time. Thank you for your blessings and your kindness, and thank you for your love. And thank you for letting us know who you are and what you are. That you are a living spirit that works through all and in all and in all. Thank you again in letting us know who we are and what we are and who we belong to, that we were bought with a price. Help us and teach us and learn us and encamp your angels around us and teach us something as we go along so we be willing and want to learn how to read the Bible and understand it. That's the only reason I try to teach these lessons, is to get people to want to read the Bible and understand that there's salvation at the end. This life is not the last life. This is only the beginning. The soul and the spirit never dies, and thank you. And this is what we're trying to get out and get people to understand and to know. Bless us as we go along, and let the words come out of my mouth, the things that you would say and not my own. I love you and I thank you, and this is a service prayer, and thank you, and hallelujah. And amen. Thank you. I'd like for you to get a pencil and a piece of paper and go along. And as I give you these scriptures, write them down, and you can look them up and read them at your own time. We started off last week. We did chapter 17. Today our hopes is to do 18 and 19. We're going to give you a little review of the last of chapter 17 starting off to bring us up to speed. Now, the last one we was talking about was Abraham's seed was confirmed. This is the last part that we had when they had the circumcision, and he circumcised everybody that was in his camp, himself as well as Ishmael. So that sealed the Abrahamic covenant. And so now we start off with chapter 18, and this was a divine visitor, appearance of God to Abraham. And that's verse 18, that chapter 18, verses 1 and 2. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Manna, and he sat at the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, three men stood by him. And he ran out to meet them at the door and bowed his head to the ground. This was a custom at that time, like we were saying earlier. When the wayward travelers would come, it was customary for the people that was on the road as they passed. They would give them something to eat and wash their feet and make them comfortable so they can move on. Now these three men was God and two angels. That's what a divine visitor was. And that was verses 1 and 2. So now we're going down to verses 3 and 5, and that's the reception. Verse 3. And the Lord said, my Lord, Verse 3, and said, my Lord. This is Abraham talking. If now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, thy servant. Verse 4. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Verse 5. And I will fetch a morsel of bread and comfort you in your hearts, and you shall pass therefore and come to your servant. And they said, do as you said. This is what the servant said. Okay, that's verse 5. So now, the next section is 6 and 8. That's the dinner. And a little information on this, go back to verse 5. You can read the references, and that is, you can, in verse 8 where they're going to actually have the dinner, but you can find different references where they eat, and that would be in Exodus 24, 9, and 11. It's just the same thing where they're showing where they eat, you know, and drink. Not drink, but eat and drink, but they didn't drink wine. The only two places in the Bible they drank wine was when Melchizedek first met Abraham in Genesis 14:18, and at the Last Supper that Jesus Christ had before he was crucified. These are the only two places where they drank wine and didn't eat. These other two places they just eat, you know, and they had, you know, milk and stuff like that, but they didn't drink no wine. And thank you. Okay. Now this next section goes from 6 to 8. And Abraham hastened into the tent and said, he told Sarah, make ready the morsels of fine meal and knead, and make cakes upon the heat. Verse 7, and Abraham ran out to the herd and fetched a calf, and the young man dressed the calf. Verse 8, and he took the butter and the milk and the calf which they had dressed, and they set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. Now, in those days, the servant that was serving the food, he didn't eat with the people. His job was to sit and dine them, and that's what he did. Now, as you go along with that, now the next section goes from verses 9 through 15. And that's the conversation, and this is the Saraitic covenant confirmed. The reason I'm saying that, this was the prophecy of the Abrahamic seed. This was when God had revealed himself coming down now to Sarah. We start at 9. And they said unto him, where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to a set time of life. Lo, and Sarah thy wife, and their son. And Sarah heard this in the tent behind. She was back in the kitchen somewhere cooking, and she heard this, and she laughed. Verse 11, and Abraham and Sarah were old and stricken in age, and ceased to be. Sarah after a manner of men. 12, therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, I am waxed and old. Should I have pleasure with my Lord being old also? Now, I told you he had laughed. Now, verse 13. And the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I have surely bear a child, which I am old? And then he says, is anything too hard for the Lord? That's verse 13. That's verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And at the time appointed I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Now, this time that you're going to have it, you're going to find that in Genesis 21, verses 1 through 8. That's in the next 3 chapters. So now we're moving on. This next section would be from chapter 16 through 22. This is the departure. And the men rose up thence and looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to bring them on their way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? In other words, they came down to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And he thought about should he tell Abraham or should he shouldn't. And so his answer to himself was he never hid anything from his friends. And you can find that in Psalms 84 and 11 and John 15 and 15 and James. You'll find that in chapter 1 through 5 and 2 and 23. Showing you that he never hid anything from his friends. So let's pick that section up now. Verse 18. Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do the justice and the judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken of him. And the Lord said, because thy cry in Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous. Verse 22. Verse 21, rather. I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me. And if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces down thence and went toward Sodom. And Abraham stood yet before the Lord. Now, this next section goes from verse 23 to verse 33. And Abraham plays the part of an intercessor, you might say. He tries to bargain with God. And I won't read all of these. I'll just start you off with verse 23. And Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous as well as the wicked? Provincial, there be 50 within the city, wilt thou also destroy not and spare the place for 50 righteous in therein? Now, provincial means perhaps. That's what that word means. Perhaps, or maybe. So when you read that word, that's what that word means. Anyway, he starts off with 50 and he went down by 5. That's what it tells you in verses 26, 27, and so forth. So he bargained with him and go all the way down. He said, if there be 10, I'm going all the way from 24. I'm going to start at, say, 31. And he said, behold, now I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord. There's their word peradventure. I call it perhaps. Perhaps there shall be 20 found in there, and I will not destroy if there's 20 for his sake. In other words, he kept going down till he went all the way down to 33. And the Lord went on his way, and he had left communing with Abraham, and Abraham returned unto his place. In other words, he went all the way down. He's told him at the end, if he can find just 10, he wouldn't destroy it. But he couldn't find 10. So now we're going to start on chapter 19. All right, chapter 19. And this goes from verses 1 through 3. This is the destruction of Sodom and Lot and the angels. And there came angels in Sodom, and even the Lord said and even Lot sat at the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and bowed himself in the face towards the ground. Verse 2. And he said, behold, now my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house. Tarry all night, and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they say, nay, but we'll abide in the streets all night. Now, these two men, they were angels. Now, it's going to pick up some. Now, verse 3. And he pressed upon greatly, and they turned into him and entered into the house. And he made a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Okay. This section goes from 4 through 9, by the way. And it tells you about Lot and the mob. Verse 5. And they call upon Lot. Verse 4, rather. But before they laid down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compressed the house around both, and the old and the young, all of the people from every quarter, that's from everywhere. And they called upon Lot, and said unto him, where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. Now, when you get down a little bit further, it's going to tell you some things. I'll read a little bit more. And Lot went out the door unto them, and shut the door after him. And he said, I pray thee, brethren, do not so wickedly. Verse 8. Behold now, I have 2 daughters which have not known men. I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do as you with them, in the eyes only unto these men. Do nothing to them that are under the shadow of my roof. In other words, when wayward strangers came to a person's house at that time, the owner of the house protected the men. And it's a catch that I was trying to get you to see earlier. These two daughters, in verse 8, they claim that men have not known them, but yet they were married. But the thing I'm trying to get you to see is that they hadn't entered into the marriage relationship with them. They had only sodomized and homosexuals. So you can find that. I'd like for you to read Romans, first chapter, verse 27. I'd like for you to read that at your spare time. It's very interesting. And it'll tell you a lot about what I'm trying to tell you at this point. Verse 9. And they said, stand back. They said again, this one came into sojourn, and he needs to be a judge. Now will thou deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed on the door. In other words, they was going to take Lot out of there and do something to him if Lot didn't turn him over. That was what the gist was. Okay, now, from this section, these angels came out and they blinded these people that was there. I'll read verse 10 and we'll pick up from there. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Verse 11. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they were weary with themselves and could not find the door. Verse 12. And the men said unto Lot, hast thou any here besides your son-in-law and thy sons and thy daughters? And whosoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. In other words, these angels has been to tell them that they're fixing to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And he was asking them to get all your family together because y'all got to get up out of here. And so that's in the gist of that. And so this next one, this is verse 14 by itself that I had said. Now, verse 14, and Lot went up out and spoke to his son-in-laws, which married his daughters, and said, up, get thou out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that was mocked unto the son-in-laws. In other words, this is a reference that I'd like for you to read. It's in 2 Peter, that's 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. And it tells you similar the same thing as what I'm trying to get you to see. In other words, they didn't want nothing to do with it. Matter of fact, they didn't even go with Lot. They stayed. Show you what they was and what kind of people that they were. Okay, this is verse 15 now. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened, Lot saying, arise, take wife and thy two daughters, because the son-in-law didn't want to go, which are here, lest thou wilt be consumed with the iniquity of the city. Verse 16, and while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon his hand and his wife, and upon the hand of their two daughters, and the Lord being merciful unto them, that they brought them out, and set forth without the city. They left and went out the city. Verse 17, and it came to pass, when they brought them forth aboard in the sand, escaped for their life. And so he says, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. He was telling them, escape to the mountains and don't turn around, don't look back, lest thou be consumed. And so this is where you heard the story where Lot's wife looked back and she turned to a pillar of salt, as you'll read later. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my Lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy. Thou hast shown us unto being saying into and saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain, lest evil take me, I will die. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape either. Let me escape thither. It is not a little one, and my soul shall live. And he said unto him, seeing I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow the city for which thou hast spoken. Hasten thee, escape thither, for I cannot do this thing till thou come thither. In other words, he got to leave. Therefore, the name of the city is called Zorah. 23. The sun was risen up, and the earth went, and Lot entered into Zorah. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew these cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the city, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back, and behold, she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and towards the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, and smoke, that country went up in smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities, the plain, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of and overthrown, when he overthrew the city in Lot's where Lot dwelled. In other words, he saved Lot, and he went down and got him. That's what he's saying. And Lot went up to Zorah and dwelled in the mountains, and his daughter and his two daughters with him. For he feared to dwell in Zorah, and he dwelled in a cave, be him and his two daughters. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old. Now this one here, the daughters went up under Lot and had children. That's what he's telling you here. I'll read it on down. And they were cursed for this. I'll read it. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and he will be with him, and they will preserve the seed of our father. Verse 33. And they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went into him and laid with her father. And he perceived not when she laid down, and when she arose. Verse 34. And it came to pass on the morning that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I have laid yesternight with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and go thou and lay with him, that we may preserve our father's seed. Verse 35. And they made their father drink wine that night also, and the young arose and laid with him to preserve, he perceived not, and when he laid down, when he arose. That's as far as we'll go today on this one. I'll finish up this lesson next week. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you got something out of it. And I'll explain a little bit more about this last chapter next week and finish it up when we go to chapter 20. I'd like to close with a little prayer, if I might. Thank you, Father. Thank you for you being who you are again. And thank you for bringing us this lesson. Thank you for teaching us and carrying us